Welcome to Tenses. Today we take a look at the present simple and the present continuous tenses. Let's begin with the present simple. When do we use this tense? First of all, we use the present simple to describe states. For example, she is pregnant. I love traveling. We use the present simple to describe routines. For example, he usually exercises before work. The children take a break after school. We also use the present simple to describe habits that we may have. For example, he brushes his teeth after every meal. She bites her nails when she's nervous. And we use the present simple to describe facts which are well established. For example, babies cry when they're hungry. Another example, schools teach children how to read and write. Now, what about the present continuous? When do we use this tense? First of all, we use the present continuous to describe a temporary situation. For example, at the moment, I'm reading a book. Another example, we're staying at the Oasis Hotel, temporarily. We also use the present continuous to describe trends. For example, more and more children are getting ill. The diet of the typical Singaporean is changing. So trends which are happening. Take note, we often use verbs describing change such as increase or get plus an adjective. As you can see in the example, more and more children are getting ill. Now we also use the present continuous with some state verbs that have a progressive meaning. For example, we're loving every minute of this party. The IT industry is appealing to new graduates these days. Normally, love and appeal are verbs which are used in the present simple tense. In this case, we use them in the continuous tense to give a progressive meaning. Now this table simplifies the use of time adverbials for the present simple and the present continuous. Study this table to make it easier for you to know when to use which adverbials for which tense. Let's take a look at the first row. Remember that we use the present simple for facts, and with these facts we can use time adverbials such as in general, normally, generally speaking. Now you've seen that we also use the present simple for habits or routines, and with these sorts of sentences we can use time adverbials such as rarely, from time to time, every week, every day. You've seen that we use the present continuous to talk about trends, and with these we use time adverbials such as nowadays, increasingly, these days, today. Finally, we use the present continuous to talk about a temporary situation, and with these we can use time adverbials such as at the moment, at present, presently, currently, temporarily, for the time being. Now let's take a look at how we use these time adverbials. Now some time adverbials can have two different meanings when we use it in the simple tense or in the continuous tense. For example, the time adverbial nowadays. Using it in the present simple, For affect, for example, we like to take the train instead of the bus nowadays. We use this time adverbial to talk about affect in the present simple form. We can also use nowadays with the present continuous to talk about a trend or a new development. For example, nowadays, more and more people are wearing contact lenses. So this is an example of a time adverbial that can be used in either tense for a different reason. Now, frequency adverbs such as always, forever, and continually are often used to emphasize an emotional reaction, usually a negative one, to a regular activity or action. For example, my roommate is always leaving her clothes on the floor. I can't stand it. So, a complaint, a negative reaction to something that happens regularly. The second example, the neighbors are forever playing their radio at the loudest volume. It's annoying. The third example, the library is continually moving the shelves around. I can never find books in the same place. So, frequency adverbs with the present continuous tense to emphasize a usually negative reaction to an action that is regular. Moving on. Now we come to adverbials which can be single word or multi-word. Let's take a look at the single word adverbials. We use single word adverbials between the subject and the verb. For example, my sister, subject, usually, single word adverbial, sleeps, present simple tense, in the afternoons. Now we can use single word adverbials after the auxiliary verb if we're using the present continuous tense. For example, you are always leaving your work until the last minute. So the adverbial always comes after the auxiliary verb are. We also use single word adverbials after the main verb be. For example, my father is generally at home by 9 p.m. So using generally after the verb is. Finally, after a negative auxiliary verb, for example, the baby isn't always crying. Don't exaggerate. So using the adverbial always after the negative auxiliary verb isn't. Moving on, multi-word adverbials. Now these can be used at the start or the end of a sentence or a clause. For example, most of the time, beginning of the sentence, we wait for our father to come home before we have dinner. Or, we wait for our father to come home before we have dinner most of the time, at the end of the sentence. Second example, from time to time I see her, beginning of the clause, but we don't make plans to meet. Or, I see her from time to time, but we don't make plans to meet. Third example, using the multi-word adverbial these days. An increasing number of teenagers is starting a small business these days. These days, an increasing number of teenagers is starting a small business. time for you to practice what you've learned. Take a look at the sentences and choose the more likely options. Remember to review the table on time adverbials and when to use them for each of the tenses so that you can remember before you try the practice. Good luck!